Well, I always base all my artworks on a kind of template of an original object, so I make pots, that are real pots. And so I'm always looking around museums for categories of objects that I fancy having a go at. And a tapestry, they came before oil paintings. Oil paintings are basically second-class tapestries. And so as an archaic sort of object, I was always interested in making one. And when I found out about this huge machine in Belgium that digitally produces these tapestries, and I'd seen a test piece, and I liked the fact that they still looked a bit organic. They didn't have that deadness that digital things can often have, a sort of flatness and exactness. It still has a sort of bit of a ripple to it and things. And so I just thought about tapestries. And then I thought about the proportion of the room where I was going to exhibit it. I thought about the idea of when I had a book launch, I would need a logo board to stand in front of, like they have at kind of product launches and fashion shows. They always have a logo. So that maybe was the initial inspiration, was the idea of the logo board. And then someone showed me a book of Sumatran batiks. And so that sort of set in my mind the kind of decorative nature of it. And then I started to kind of get more rational and think about what I wanted it to show. And I've always been been interested in the pilgrimage and the journey and the idea of the journey through life. And then I thought about, is this the kind of shopping trip of life? The kind of glossy, sort of meaningless trek from one department store to another. that is modern Western consumerism. And so we've got the 7 ages of man, and then a plethora of familiar brands, some of which perhaps look like they're meant to be under the thing that they're illustrating, and some not. And what's interesting is that they're all in the same font. And so when they're divorced from their product and their logo, all that is left is that emotional resonance of the brand and what they mean to us. So if I say to you EasyJet, some people think, great, it means I can go on holiday for cheap, and other people think nightmare. So it's like, I'm not being necessarily judgmental about any of these brands, but there is a moral question to be asked about whether the way that brands inveigle their way into our minds, like the Normans invaded England. So this is the modern Bayeux tapestry in some ways. It's about the subtle invasion of our emotional lives by brands. I suppose the sort of art that I like the most is religious art, and I wanted to make something that had the feeling of a kind of fresco, I suppose, to certainly say. And of course, I needed a kind of icon in the middle. I wanted a kind of Madonna figure, and the inspiration came from a Stephen Meisel photo shoot he did a few years ago. I think it was called 4 Days in LA for Versace. She's clutching the handbag, which is the absolute iconic consumer item in that, they are lustfully sculptural. They're almost like shiny leather vaginas in some ways. And she's sort of clutching it because, when I've got a nice handbag, I want to stroke it and I can put it on the table in front of me, and they're the ideal consumer item in that they're kind of semi-functional, really. But in the end, it's just about this sort of lustful object that you can present to the world, almost like a portable sculpture. So that's why I chose the handbag as the icon of consumerism. There was a lot in the news last year when I was working on this about knife crime. And so I was trying to show in some terms that sort of eroticized sort of Saint Sebastian idea of youth. But also, so there is this sort of worship of youth, and also maybe that sort of youthful rebellion is one of the engines of consumerism. In that people who rebel think they're fighting the system, but in fact the system needs rebels in order to have new ideas, in order to have different things to sell. And so it's a kind of cycle that eats up stuff. Fashion particularly is a voracious monster that chomps its way through youthful creativity. I mean, most of my works, they sort of start off with a purely sort of visual, historical starting point. And I think what started this idea off was that in traditional Oriental ceramics, when they had a very precious pot and it got broken, they would mend it and they would make a feature of the mend by putting gold lacquer or gilding the mend. And I've always loved that care and celebration and honesty in that. And so I've always wanted to do a pot that had that technique in it. And I've just been waiting around for the right idea. And then when I was making the tapestry, I was thinking about shopping a lot, and then along came, right at the peak of the recession, just as it was kind of kicking off, Westfield opened, and it was a gift, this sort of alien sort of planet, Death Star, that landed in sort of Shepherd's Bush, and all glossy and new. And so I went there and I got the little map they give you to show you where you go, and I just copied it onto this pot. And then when it was finished, I made it this kind of very traditional, almost like Korean celadon colour, so it has a nice sort of tasteful subtlety to it. And then when it was finished, I took it to a restorer and with the hammer, and I smashed it on his studio floor. It took 3 good blows to smash it, which I was quite pleased with. They're quite strong. And then when it was smashed, he put it together again with the gold in the traditional way. And what I like about it is that the cracks almost form an alternative map. They're a kind of organic, destructive, but also beautiful map overlaid over the sort of map of the shopping centre. And I think it's very, just interesting to see and again, a couple of hundred shops. In years to come, we'll look at them with the same bemusement as we look at obscure gods of the past. I made this vase almost as a kind of deliberate sort of tour de force in a way, because normally I'm always sort of experimenting, trying new things. This was sort of based on a vase I made a few years ago, and I wanted to really ramp up the sort of technical sort of virtuosity in a way on it, and so that might sound a bit big-headed, but I really wanted to sort of show what I can do with ceramics with a big format. But the basic sort of story of it is that it's called Jane Austen in E17, and I think of Jane Austen as the kind of the touchstone, if you like, of a sort of polite middle-class culture in Britain. She is the kind of sacred cow, and rightfully so, of the kind of quite well-educated, tastefully polite, sort of middle-class, southern, white Britain. And so these ladies in Georgian costumes sort of represent that. Because also she was very arch and would have, laughed when she saw this vase, I hope, And the background is all these photographs I've taken either from sort of magazines, celebrity magazines, or sort of Take a Break, or those kind of gossipy magazines, but also lots of pictures I took around Walthamstow, things like security notices or adverts for singles nights or kebab shops or funny bits of litter I saw. And so it's like she's sort of blending in almost like it's very sort of dreamscape of texture. And it really, for me though, it's about the sort of sensuality of it and the colour and the way that the kind of lustrous images hover over it, and it's all about forming something that is very seductive and refined and sophisticated. It's weaving gold out of straw to a certain extent. I like walking out my studio in Walthamstow and just seeing, the piles of dog shit and the satellite dishes and the North Circular Road roaring by, and there is a kind of poetry in it, in being sort of trapped in a kind of an introspective thoughtful moment, and yet being surrounded by what is often regarded as ugly. But in fact, I think it's how we look at it. This is a fairly recent pot. This pot is called World Leaders Attend the Wedding of Alan Measles and Claire. And so in a way it's like a sort of psychic wedding of me and Alan Measles. He was my teddy bear when I was young, and he is kind of like my god. And so in my kind of imaginary world, he is the kind of celebrated folk devil, if you like. And this is like some sort of strange folk festival where he's sort of present with his bells on his penis, and he's got a little picture of me on his chest. And then there's me in my kind of folky wedding dress. And then all the world leaders from Obama and Putin and Ahmadinejad and all those people are all queuing up to kiss my hand at the wedding of me and Alan Measles. So it's there, but he's like my kind of male psyche, if you like, the kind of ideal man, leader, father figure. And then Claire is like my feminine half. So it's like their wedding there in that one pot.